They never imagined that a simple phone call could change their life forever. The day had started like any other, dull and ordinary, filled with the mundane tasks they had grown accustomed to over the years. After all, what was life without their daughter, Kona, and her father, Daniel? It had been a decade since they had disappeared, and the passage of time had done little to ease the pain or erase the memories, the relentless search, the unanswered questions, the endless wondering. It had become a part of them. They had accepted that some mysteries might never be solved, and the pain had become something they carried with them, day in and day out. But that morning, a phone call came that would change everything. They had been tidying up their room, something they had put off for weeks. The cluttered space, the papers and reminders of their lost family, seemed to weigh heavily on their heart. As they moved things around, they tried to focus on the task at hand, hoping it would help them forget, even if just for a moment. But then the phone rang. It wasn't unusual to get calls, but this one was different. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it hadn't been heard in a long time. It was Detective Aaron Delgado. His name had been etched into their memory from the very beginning of the search for Daniel and Kona. He had been the one to deliver the news that there were no new leads, the one who had been sympathetic but helpless as time wore on, and the case grew colder. Over the years, the calls had become routine. They knew what to expect. No new information, no answers, just more waiting. But this time his voice was different. It wasn't the same calm, resigned tone they had grown used to. There was a sense of urgency, a tension in his words that made their hearts skip a beat. For a moment they wondered if they were imagining it. Could it be that after all these years there was something new, something real, something that might finally bring them closer to the truth? The detective's words were brief, but they were enough to stir a spark of hope in their chest. The message was simple. We have a new lead. The words echoed in their mind over and over again as the world around them seemed to slow down. It wasn't just another dead end, another false alarm. This time there was something that felt different. This time they might actually be getting closer to the truth. They had no idea what the lead was or where it would take them, but they knew they couldn't ignore it. Their heart raced as they tried to make sense of what was happening. After all these years of waiting and searching, could it finally be happening? Could they really be getting closer to finding Kona and Daniel? As they listened to Detective Delgado's voice on the phone, they felt a wave of emotions wash over them. Confusion, disbelief, hope, and fear all at once. It was hard to comprehend what was happening. How could this be real after so many years of nothing? The detective explained that a fisherman in the Bahamas had found a message in a bottle. It seemed almost too unbelievable to grasp. For a moment they questioned if it was just another cruel hoax. Messages in bottles were the stuff of stories, but this was their reality. The detective continued, explaining that the message in the bottle had the names of their daughter, Kona, and her husband, Daniel, written on it. It had been so long since they had heard anything concrete, and now this. Could this be the break they had been desperately waiting for? The detective's words were shaky, too, as if he himself wasn't quite sure whether to believe it or not. They could sense his hesitation, the way his voice wavered with uncertainty. But there was something in those words that made them feel like they might finally have a reason to believe. The detective was asking them to come to the station as quickly as possible. He had arranged for them to meet with the team, to see what the fishermen had found, and to make plans to follow up on the lead. They didn't know what to expect, but there was no way they could let this slip away. With shaking hands, they hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The world outside their room seemed to fade away. For the first time in years, there was something tangible, something real that might bring them closer to the answers they had been longing for. The idea that Kona and Daniel might still be out there, alive, was almost too much to bear. But the thought that maybe, just maybe, they could be brought back together again, that feeling was enough to force them into action. The uncertainty, the pain, the waiting, all seemed to vanish, replaced by an almost overwhelming surge of adrenaline. They quickly packed a small bag, grabbing only the essentials, trying to stay focused. As they prepared to leave, they couldn't help but wonder if this was finally the moment that would change everything. The journey ahead, filled with unknowns and potential dangers, had begun, and they had no idea where it would lead. But the possibility of finding their family, of bringing Kona and Daniel back, gave them the strength to move forward, no matter what. The drive to the police station felt like it took forever. It was as if time had slowed down and every passing second felt like an eternity. Their heart raced as they navigated through the city, the streets becoming a blur of lights and signs. They tried to focus, to calm their mind, but the thoughts kept swirling around in their head. What if this was another false lead? What if this was just another cruel trick to keep them in a state of uncertainty? It was hard to shake the feeling of doubt that had plagued them for so long. For years, they had held on to hope, only for it to be shattered each time. It felt like a cruel cycle, one that was hard to break free from. But now this message in a bottle, it was different. They could feel it. They had to believe it was real. The detective had sounded convinced, and that gave them a glimmer of hope, however faint. As they arrived at the station, they noticed how quiet it was, the usual hustle and bustle of the building seeming subdued. Inside, they were met by Detective Delgado, who immediately led them to a small conference room. His face was tense, his eyes tired but focused, as if he too had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The room felt small, and the air inside was thick with anticipation. Elena's hands shook as she clutched her bag, but she forced herself to stay calm. This could be the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment that would finally bring her answers. The detective gestured for them to sit down, and he placed a small evidence bag on the table. Inside was a clear glass bottle, slightly clouded from time in the ocean, with a rolled piece of paper inside. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the bottle, unable to look away. The sight of it sent a rush of emotions through her: hope, fear, and an overwhelming sense of desperation. This was it. This was the connection she had been searching for. She reached for the bottle, her fingers trembling, and slowly, carefully, she opened it. Inside, they found the message, handwritten, shaky, but unmistakably Kona's handwriting. Elena's eyes welled up as she read the first few lines. It was Kona. It was her, and she was alive. After all these years of wondering, of waiting, of fearing the worst, here it was. The confirmation that her daughter had somehow survived. Elena's heart swelled with both joy and sorrow. Joy because Kona was still out there, still alive, still holding on to the hope that one day she would be found. Sorrow because the message revealed that her husband, Daniel, had been taken, forced to work with the traffickers. He had been trying to find a way out, a way to send a message, but it was too late. She had been holding on to hope for so long, never wanting to accept the possibility that Daniel might be gone. And now, it was confirmed. He had died while trying to protect their daughter. But despite the heartbreak of that revelation, Elena couldn't stop the tears from flowing. Kona was alive, and that was all that mattered. For now, that was enough. After reading the message, Elena could barely comprehend what was happening. The room around her seemed to fade away, and all she could focus on was the words on the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly that it was hard to even hold the note steady. The handwriting was unmistakable, Kona's. The message was brief, but filled with so much emotion that Elena could barely read it without her heart breaking over and over. "We're stranded on an island," the message began. "My father is still here, but I'm scared. There are bad people, and they won't let us go." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she kept reading, desperate for more information. The words on the page told her that Kona and Daniel had been taken by drug traffickers after they had stumbled upon an illegal operation while diving. They had been forced to work for them, moved from island to island, living in constant fear for their lives. The message, though desperate, also carried a sense of hope. Kona had written that she was still alive, and that her father was still with her, watching over her. Elena could hardly breathe as she processed everything, each sentence sinking in more deeply than the last. Her daughter, the girl she had been mourning for so many years, was still out there. She wasn't lost to the ocean, to the currents, to the abyss of uncertainty. She was alive, fighting, surviving. But the reality of what Kona had endured, the years of captivity, the constant fear, the toll it had taken on her, was almost more than Elena could bear. In that moment, Elena felt both relief and heartbreak. Relief because there was still hope, still a chance to get her daughter back. Heartbreak because the daughter she remembered, the girl who had been full of life and promise, was gone. The Kona in the message was a survivor, yes, but also a victim of unimaginable hardship. Elena wiped the tears from her face, knowing that this message, while heartbreaking, was the key to everything they had been searching for. It was proof that Kona and Daniel hadn't simply disappeared. They had been taken, held captive by forces beyond their control. It was the breakthrough they had needed, but now it was up to Elena and the authorities to figure out how to get Kona back, how to navigate the treacherous waters of the Bahamas, and confront the drug cartel that had held her for so long. The detective had already made arrangements to take them to the Bahamas. They were going to find Kona. But before that, they needed to process what they had just discovered. Elena's mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest. What if they were too late? What if Kona was no longer in the place she had described? What if the drug traffickers had moved her again? The uncertainty was unbearable. But there was also something else stirring inside of Elena. A deep, fierce determination. She wasn't going to lose her daughter again. Not now. Not after all these years. The next few hours felt like a blur of activity. Elena didn't have time to process everything. The world had shifted from a place of quiet grief to one of frantic urgency. Detective Delgado briefed her on the plan. They were flying to the Bahamas to investigate the lead. A team of officers would be waiting for them, ready to assist with any further investigation, and there would be a meeting with the local authorities to coordinate the search. Elena's mind raced as she sat in the small room with the detective, her eyes scanning the message in the bottle one more time. It felt like a dream, like the reality of it hadn't fully sunk in yet. Kona was alive. They had a lead. She was coming home. But even as the hope surged in her chest, fear gnawed at her. What if they couldn't find her? What if the traffickers had already moved her again, as they had done so many times before? The message spoke of a red light that only blinked on Thursdays, and that specific clue had been the key to everything. It pointed them toward a specific location in the Bahamas, a remote part of the islands, a place that traffickers used to avoid detection. The detective had told her that the search would be dangerous. They were going after a cartel that had been operating for years, and they didn't know what they would face when they got there. But none of that mattered to Elena. The only thing that mattered was finding Kona, bringing her home. As they boarded the plane, Elena took a deep breath and tried to focus. She closed her eyes, imagining her daughter out there, waiting for rescue. She could picture Kona's face in her mind, the image of her smiling as a child, the girl who had loved the ocean, loved the plants they grew together. Kona was still in there, somewhere, and that's what kept her going. That's what kept her from breaking down and giving in to the overwhelming weight of the years they had lost. The plane ride was short, but it felt long, longer than it had any right to be. When they finally arrived in the Bahamas, they were immediately taken to the operations command center. The air was thick with tension, but there was also a quiet sense of purpose. Elena could feel the determination in everyone around her. It wasn't just a job for them, it was personal. They weren't just hunting down criminals, they were hunting for a child, a woman who had been taken and forced to live a nightmare. It felt like the final stretch, the last chance to get Kona back. As they met with the local authorities and began discussing the next steps, Elena couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. She had lived so long with the idea that Kona was lost to her forever, that no matter how much she searched, no matter how many times she hoped, it wouldn't matter. But here, in this room, with the team assembled and the plan in motion, it felt real. It felt like they were actually going to find her. And for the first time in 10 years, Elena allowed herself to believe it. She wasn't just chasing a dream anymore. This was happening. And no matter how long it took, no matter what they had to face, she would do everything in her power to bring her daughter home. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Elena had barely enough time to process what was happening. One moment she was sitting in a conference room with officials, staring at maps and listening to tactical plans, and the next, she was being ushered onto a small boat headed toward the area where the lead had pointed them. The Bahamas, a place known for its clear waters and vibrant culture, now felt like a foreign land, a place of danger and uncertainty. As the boat cut through the water, Elena's heart thudded in her chest. The waves seemed to push them further, but her mind was still back at the police station, still grasping the hope of finding her daughter alive. The day was hot, but Elena's body was ice cold, her nerves frayed. Every splash of water against the boat, every shift of the wind felt like it was building toward something monumental. They had no way of knowing exactly where Kona was or if they were even on the right track, but they knew that the message was real, that the person who had written it had been in desperate need of help, and that desperation was now their guide. As they arrived at a small remote island, Elena felt the weight of the moment. They had come so far, but the real work was only just beginning. They disembarked and made their way toward a small clearing near the shore. The area was eerily quiet, but the air was thick with the scent of salt water and the unknown. Elena's senses were heightened, every movement around her sending a jolt of tension through her body. She had no idea what to expect, but her mind raced with possibilities. What if Kona was here? What if the traffickers had already moved her again? What if the lead was a mistake? The possibilities swirled like a storm in her mind, but Elena refused to let herself be consumed by fear. She had come this far. She wasn't turning back now. They had a lead, and that lead was everything. They needed to find Kona. As they combed the island, searching for any signs of life, Elena's eyes kept scanning the area, hoping for a glimpse of her daughter. The pain of the past 10 years was still there, but it had been replaced by something else. Determination. There was no going back. Every step they took on that island was another step closer to bringing Kona home. There were no guarantees, no promises of success, but Elena knew one thing for sure. She was going to fight for her daughter, no matter what. She didn't care about the odds or how difficult it might be. She had waited too long for this moment. They had waited too long. It was time to end the uncertainty. The search went on for what felt like hours, but it was as though the island itself was holding its breath, hiding the answers they desperately needed. Every brush of wind through the palm trees, every creak of wood on the boats felt like a sign. They were getting closer, but how much closer? Elena had to fight the rising panic. It was a strange feeling, the feeling of being close yet so far away. She kept thinking about the message. She had read it over and over again, trying to decipher every clue. The red rocks, the horseshoe-shaped bay, the blinking red light only on Thursdays. It all pointed here, to this remote island, to this very moment. But where was Kona? They walked through the brush, the ground soft beneath their boots. The team spread out, making their way across the small stretch of land. Every now and then, Elena's eyes would catch a glimpse of something, a rustling in the trees, a shadow moving in the distance. But it was never Kona. It felt like the island was playing tricks on her, showing her little glimpses of hope, only to have it fade away the moment she thought she saw something. Time dragged on. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the landscape, and yet it felt like the clock was ticking faster. Elena pushed forward, her mind filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Could it be possible that Kona was so close, and they hadn't found her yet? Her legs were aching from the constant movement, but there was no stopping, no rest. Not when she was so close. The officers and local authorities were doing their best to stay focused, but Elena could sense their exhaustion too. This search wasn't just about finding Kona. It was about ending a decade of uncertainty and pain. It was about bringing back a piece of her life that had been ripped away. Elena wiped the sweat off her brow. pushing through the growing sense of dread that was starting to settle in her stomach. It wasn't like her to doubt. She had been hopeful for so long. She couldn't afford to lose that hope now. She had to keep going. There had to be something here, something that would tell her where Kona was. As the last light of the day began to fade, Elena's determination didn't waver. She would keep searching. She would keep fighting. And she would not leave this island without her daughter. Just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, something changed. Elena was walking along the edge of the island when she caught sight of something small, almost hidden beneath the sand near the water's edge. At first she thought it was just debris, a piece of plastic or a shell carried by the tide. But as she approached, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't debris. It was an ankle bracelet, a handmade one, the kind Kona used to wear when she was younger. Elena's hands shook as she knelt down to pick it up, the familiar blue and turquoise beads gleaming in the dimming light. The bracelet, so small yet so significant, felt like a message from her daughter, a confirmation that she had been here, that she had been close. The sight of it stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a piece of Kona's life, something so personal, so intimate it was almost like Kona was reaching out to her from the past. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked at the bracelet, her mind racing with the implications. Had Kona dropped it here recently? Was it possible that she was still on this island just beyond the trees or hidden away somewhere? Or was this just another cruel twist of fate, a sign that Kona had been here long ago but had already been moved? Elena didn't know, but what she did know was that this bracelet was a clear sign, a sign that they were on the right track. She couldn't stop herself from holding it tightly in her hand, as though it could somehow bring her daughter closer. She stood up, scanning the beach once again, but this time with a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when there was this tangible connection to Kona. She called out to the team, her voice trembling but strong. "I found something. It's Kona's." Detective Delgado and the others rushed over, their expressions turning from concern to urgency when they saw the bracelet. Elena's heart was pounding, the adrenaline surging as they all realized the significance of what had just been uncovered. The team quickly sprang into action, calling for reinforcements, expanding their search, and moving toward the area where the bracelet had been found. Elena's legs felt weak, but her resolve was stronger than ever. This wasn't over. They were close. So close. And this bracelet, this symbol of Kona's life, was the proof they needed. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when they were this close to bringing her daughter home. The search intensified after Elena found the bracelet. The team split up, and every officer seemed to pick up the pace, fueled by the discovery of something that truly tied them to Kona. Elena, despite the exhaustion gnawing at her bones, pushed forward without a second thought. Her mind was sharp, focused, and there was only one thing that mattered now: finding Kona. She was no longer consumed by fear, but by an unstoppable drive to reunite with her daughter. They moved quickly, following the trail they hoped would lead to her. As they approached the far side of the island, Elena spotted something unusual. There was a shack tucked away behind a thicket of trees partially obscured by the foliage. It looked abandoned, but something about it didn't sit right with her. Her gut told her that it wasn't just a simple storage building, and it didn't look like anyone had lived there for years. But why would it be hidden like that? And why was it so isolated? Elena felt her pulse quicken as she approached, the others following closely behind her. Detective Delgado gave a signal, and the officers circled around the back of the building to check for any signs of activity. Elena's heart was pounding in her chest as they carefully approached the shack. Her hands were still trembling from the discovery of the bracelet, and now they were closer to finding something even bigger. It was too quiet, too still. There were no signs of life, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer. One of the officers peeked through the small window and reported back. "It's dark inside. Looks like it's just used for storage. Boxes, crates, and some sacks." Elena felt a tightness in her chest. If this was where Kona had been held, if this shack was a part of her captivity, what had they been keeping in there? They had no way of knowing for sure, But the longer they stood there, the more Elena felt the weight of the situation. Her mind raced, piecing together all the information they had. Kona and Daniel had been caught in the middle of something far bigger than they could have imagined. But the hope that they were still close, that they could still be found, fueled Elena's determination to move forward. She refused to leave without answers. As they cautiously approached the shack, something caught her eye. Movement. A boy, no older than 16, appeared from behind the building looking straight at them. He froze for a moment, his eyes wide with fear, and then, without warning, turned and bolted. Elena's heart stopped for a beat. Was this someone connected to the traffickers? Was he part of the operation? She didn't know, but she couldn't let him get away. Her instincts kicked in. "Stop! Police!" she called out. The chase was on. The boy was fast, darting between palm trees and scrambling over the uneven ground with an agility that seemed to come from years of practice. Elena pushed her legs harder, but she could feel the distance between them growing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She wasn't about to let him get away, not now. She needed answers, and he might be the key. As they sprinted through the island's dense underbrush, she could hear the officers closing in behind her, but her focus was entirely on the boy. He glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes wide with fear, and in that split second of distraction, his foot caught on an exposed root. He tumbled to the ground, and before he could scramble to his feet, Detective Delgado and another officer reached him. They grabbed him, pulling him upright, and the boy's terrified eyes met Elena's. "Why did you run?" she demanded, her voice breathless but firm. The boy shook his head, avoiding her gaze, but Elena wasn't about to let him slip away. She pressed him further, showing him the photos of Kona and Daniel, asking if he knew them, if he had seen them. His silence was deafening, but there was something in his eyes, something that told her he knew more than he was letting on. Then, just as Elena was about to speak again, the boy hesitated, his face flickering with guilt. "I've seen her," he muttered, his voice trembling. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Kona was alive. He had seen her. The boy, Miguel, finally admitted that he had seen Kona, and though he was reluctant to give more information, Elena could tell that he was holding back. He spoke of her being moved from place to place, never staying in one location long enough to be found. The traffickers kept her hidden, afraid someone might rescue her. But Miguel's admission was enough to change everything. After years of waiting, of wondering if Kona was still out there, the confirmation that she was alive felt like a wave crashing over Elena. She hadn't been wrong all these years. She wasn't crazy for continuing the search. Kona was out there, and she was waiting to be found. Elena's mind raced as she thought about the next steps. The boy's information, combined with the clues from the message in the bottle, was enough to set a plan in motion. The team would move in, and with the support of local authorities, they would track down Kona. By the time they returned to the operations command center, the atmosphere had shifted. Elena no longer felt the hopelessness she had carried for so long. She could see the path ahead now, and it was clear. They were going to find Kona, bring her home. It wasn't just about a daughter being reunited with her mother. It was about righting a wrong, about justice for the years that had been stolen from them. And when that moment finally came, when Elena saw her daughter's face again, alive and safe, everything she had gone through would have been worth it. It had been a long, painful journey, but the end was in sight. For the first time in years, Elena allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a happy ending.